the proactive effort to communicate, to develop that relationship, because it could be very easy to just stay behind my screen and just do the job. Aligning expectations, business outcomes on those central platforms is key. If you don't manage the basics and the processes, and you're not managing the people in a way that's going to be effective, then those shiny new objects and tools and innovations aren't really going to help you. If you don't have someone that you can help train that can manage those things on site, start doing that.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Heroes of Hybrid Work. On today's pod, I'm very excited to welcome George Alvarado, Director of Service Delivery Training for Maintenance and Janitorial at C&W Services, an integrated facility services provider that helps clients drive down facility operating costs or operating expenses, increase facility efficiency and uptime, make strategic business decisions, and create a positive occupant experience, which we continue to talk about how important that employee experience is to facilities leaders today. Previously, George served the U.S. Air Force for over 20 years in roles such as Maintenance Operations Center Manager, Asset Logistics and Program Manager, Senior Nuclear Facilities Manager, and so many more roles. George was recently named to SCEDA's Top 20 Facilities Leaders Shaping Hybrid Work in 2024. And for all of these reasons, he joins us as a hero of hybrid work today. George, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jenny. It's definitely a privilege, and thank you for nominating or winning that recognition. I think that was pretty cool to be named among some of the greats, so I appreciate you.
You deserved it. Earned and deserved. All right, let's start with something easy. You spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. How did that impressive time there in maintenance operations and so many other roles lead you to where you are today and your passion in facilities management?
I'm younger in appearance than most people don't really realize, right? So people, when they hear 20 years in the Air Force, are like, how did you do that? But in the time in the Air Force, I definitely was able to be exposed to a lot of different skills that I have today when it comes to like operational excellence, leadership development, strategic thinking, problem solving, continuous process improvement, business continuity, and then of course some of those occupations that I was able to do, those special duties that involved facilities or maintenance management, reliability, engineering, and thinking. A lot of that stuff is a interdisciplinary kind of approach that you take with facilities. The best thing that I always learned, not just with leadership development, is just human capital management. I love being able to manage people, leading teams, but now I'm in a position where I get to mentor, coach, and help other teams, frontline skills employees, supervisors, and managers do that for their teams. So that's the benefit, is I've always been a people-focused kind of person in the Air Force, and even now since I've been out. And that's one of the best skills that I've learned, especially when it comes to facilities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like you learned a lot about operational excellence, but also leadership principles in the U.S. Air Force. So are there certain leadership skills that you really took into your next role here at C&W?
Yeah, leadership skills. When you're talking about leadership skills, you're talking about somebody who is trying to understand team dynamics, things like change management, understanding systems thinking, not only with how does your team function within a particular environment, but how do processes work and how do you get those processes to work for your team, right? And then you're talking about goals, outcomes, business alignment, business impact, expectations. All this is very team-oriented leadership stuff. But one thing that we overlook is technology. How do you use particular types of tools and technology to accomplish those goals, to accomplish those outcomes, right? And some people are technically not proficient, unfortunately. They're leaders, they're great people, but they fail sometimes in taking technology into consideration, how to use that so that they can accomplish their goals. Other times they're great people, but then once again, process kind of falls on the wayside. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and understanding how process works and then managing process, I think, is key in being in leadership roles.
Yeah, two really extremely important skills. And you're right, sometimes those two behavioral skills are not in the same person, right?
Yes, yes,
We have strengths in certain areas, and a lot of times those two are not the same. So we have to stretch, right? And so
yes.
we talk a lot on this show about the changing facilities role and how facilities leaders are required to stretch today in order to be leaders, right? And get that seat at the table. I'm wondering, so at C&W, it's stated very clearly that you're finding new ways to innovate and create value that challenges the established ways of thinking about facility services. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you all are challenging the way we think about facilities.
So, one of the biggest things when it comes to challenging, when you talk about innovation, we definitely try to stress here, and I've always stressed, is that sometimes taking the basics and then applying them to either newer technologies like now AI, or even being able to use any kind of integrated systems that we come up with, taking some of those basics and figure out how do those tools work with those things. We take shiny new objects, we think everything that's innovative and everything that's new is what we should be doing. When in reality, sometimes we're still failing at the basics. When we're talking about proactive operations, right? How do you measure whether or not you're taking care of your PMs in light of all the other work orders? Are you conducting any kind of reliability and maintenance engineering? Are you looking at your systems in the long term? Are you looking at how everything works together? Are you looking at sustainability, right? These basic stuff. And how are you using those new tools, those new innovative ways to help you conduct operations in the most basic fashion? Once you get the basics down, then looking at the shiny new object of tools, like how do you create an automated system that helps you to track and create reports and that kind of other thing for QBRs, those are all great. But if you don't manage the basics and the processes, and you're not managing the people in a way that's going to be effective, then those shiny new objects and tools and innovations aren't really going to help you. So that's one of the things that we stress is we're trying to make sure that people understand the standards, the basics, things that are going to streamline their processes, lean process improvement, right? Business development, those kinds of things, workforce development, planning, learning and
Yeah.
development, training. I can continue to spit all these
Yeah.
things out, but
Yeah.
these are all very, very basic things. And now we're looking at, okay, so these tools, how do we get these tools to work for us in a way that's going to impact the business in the long term? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, what do you think people are missing? Like, what do you think is the biggest basic function or, whatever the basics are? What do you think the biggest one people are missing that, because I hear you, like you want to layer in the AI and the tools once you have the basics down, but can you bring it to life for us a little bit? Like, what's the biggest thing?
Depends on which category. If you're talking about people, process, or property, which we'll hopefully talk about later, right? When it comes to people, it is just supporting relationship building, figuring out how do you equip and empower your people to make the decisions that they need. Do they have the right training and resources to make those decisions so that they can go and execute the job? If you're talking about processes, we're talking about typical things like work management, being able to understand from a work order from beginning to end, what does a work order life cycle look like? How do you track that work order? What kind of work are you conducting? Is it reactive? Is it proactive? Are you focusing more on your PMs, which you should be focusing on, being less reactive? And then, of course, when it comes to property, looking at assets, trying to figure out, what is the overall life cycle of your assets? Are they constantly breaking? Why are they constantly breaking? Are we conducting root cause analysis and defect elimination? Those kinds of things, right? How do we figure out to design out of the process things that are causing the assets to fail? Right? Is it human error? Is it the parts? Is it the equipment? Is it the environment? So when you consider a lot of these different categories and different things, these kinds of basics help us understand systems thinking, reliability thinking, human-centered thinking. And then when we look at the tools, we say, how do we get those tools to function in such a way that helps us understand these systems thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely makes sense. That's awesome. Yeah, I know we jumped the gun a little bit on the people process property, but I think,
A little
you know,
forecasting, right? Sorry, yeah.
I think it's a wonderful framework, honestly, for people listening in, attacking these things in these three buckets, we'll set them up for success. So what do you think are the biggest opportunities for facilities managers to upskill? In it could be a hybrid model, it could be, just a flexible work model.
Yeah.
I love your take on people, process, and properties. So, if you layer on that hybrid work element, What are the people skills? Let's start with people. You're not always present to deliver trainings. How can facilities leader really jump in here?
Relationship building is key. So having those conversations constantly, text, phone calls, emails, whatever you have to do to ensure that not only you align strategically about your business outcomes, especially if you're talking to a client, but with your own people, right? You want to develop relationships with the employees that are working on your team because they're the ones that are going to deliver the service, right? So as a manager, you're just trying to figure out, how do I develop a relationship in such a way that helps make this workplace not only a positive workplace, an encouraging workplace, an effective and empowering workplace, but also a workplace in which we work well together, right? It's healthy. And people don't dread Sunday night going to sleep, waking up Sunday morning, right? Like,
Everyone dreads this.
oh, I don't want to do this again, right?
Sunday
And it's
scaries.
say again.
Sunday scaries. I actually have a sweater that says Sunday scaries.
Oh, do you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think critical relationship building is key. And then, of course, you have the more popular ones, right? Emotional intelligence, being able to hear and talk to people in a virtual environment that you can still kind of pick up when something is wrong. Then you have change management skills, understanding, forecasting, and foreshadowing things that could be going on that you might want to be able to manage the change for. Understanding conflict resolutions, another people skill, business continuity. And then this is key, especially when it comes to upskilling, is just understanding how to create a virtual training environment. So learning how to facilitate, not just training, but understanding what are the virtual resources you can use. Is it a self-paced training? Is there a module online? Is there videos? Is there something that you can put together like a job aid or a reference guide that helps people to reference in a virtual environment so they don't necessarily need to ask you questions all the time? Those kinds of things is really helpful in a hybrid environment where you can't be there all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and would you say that that is a new skill that facilities leaders need? This facilitating of a virtual training or a virtual environment, is that relatively new in our time?
Yeah, I would say so. I think maybe some facilitating managers have, because I know some who have been working remote, for years already, right?
Yeah,
Before it was the new thing in 2020.
right.
But as far as the hybrid environment goes, I think learning how to master tools like Zoom, like Teams, like WebEx or Miro, or like these other online platforms, understanding how they function, how they work, how can you get those tools to help you engage not only a client, but your employees, right? Exercises that you can use, the different functionalities that those things have, either whether it's sending emails or sending reminders or calendar invites, organizing that stuff. Sometimes it's very basic to us because we're so used to using those tools, but for somebody who's a new facility manager, or maybe even somebody who's been in it for a while, is still not used to going into a hybrid environment, it's very, very beneficial for them to understand how to use those technologies so that they can help coordinate, collaborate, and those kinds of stuff.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about, synchronous tools and asynchronous tools. Like, what can you send beforehand that's asynchronous learning, and then have the synchronized meeting, right? What are all the things that you can put together to be most effective in the hybrid environment? It's a great segue because we talk a lot about the coordination tax
Mm.
of hybrid work, and how important it is to communicate, coordinate, and collaborate, and not have that time be spent coordinating, but have the time spent actually getting business done, right? So,
Hmm.
what are the tools that can help in a process from a process perspective
Yeah.
to kind of eliminate that coordination hybrid tax?
Much like with the virtual training or the virtual tools that you can use, you still want to look at some of those virtual tools that help you with like project management. Smartsheet, I know, has some project management capabilities.
Oh yeah,
There are other platforms out there that I'm familiar, or I'm sorry, I'm sure that other people are familiar with using those kinds of online tools to help you track not just projects, but progress and where you're going with particular goals are very, very helpful, right? Long ago were the days where you had, Excel worksheets and everything was kind of broken down, but a lot of other tools have been really helpful in being able to help you just give you a snapshot view on where you're at on particular projects, right? And I've heard and I've seen online tutorials on how sometimes now AI is doing some of those things as well. even things like Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, where it actually might summarize what is your work and your projects for the day. What are some things that are due? What are some things that are overdue? And you can kind of program all that stuff to work for you in a project management kind of way, right? And then having a singular platform where everybody can collaborate on essential communications, right? So being able to understand aligning expectations, business outcomes on those central platforms is key. So if you got to use Teams, you got to use Slack. I heard Miro is another one. Whatever online tools you can use, group text, ensure that everybody's on the same page using that single point of communication so that we all know where's the official line of talk coming from, right? How do we know what's next? How do we know what we're doing? How do we know whether or not we're going to be progressing in a particular direction? And that helps with change communication, upskilling, all those other things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And of course, having some kind of standard operating procedure that's well known, managing that, making sure people are following that so that way everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. I love your focus on business outcomes because I think in a hybrid world, performance should be based on outcomes, not where you located, right? Not where you're working from, not the coffee shop or the office, right? It's really like, are you actually meeting your goals? Which actually gets back to the basics we were talking about, right? The basics in leadership is have your goals, right? Make
Yes.
sure that people are held accountable to those goals. And if they're not performing, then you have the conversation, not where you're located or your proximity to a leader. So no, that's definitely very validating. So jumping into the property skills, right, and kind of a nice segue from business outcomes, what's the best way to monitor building management systems and assets, and what metrics should we be tracking? What are the business outcomes when it
How much
comes
time do we have for this one? Oh my goodness. And this is where the technology piece comes in with hybrid, right? And some
Yeah.
people are used to these building management systems when they were on site already, but now you're going to have to figure out how do you do this from your laptop? Do you have the technology to do that? Does your
Yeah.
company provide that technology? And if you don't, how are some ways that you're going to be able to utilize those kinds of systems? If not a building management system, maybe a CMMS, computer maintenance management system of some kind that you can do remotely because you're not always going to be there. Or at least if you don't have that, have somebody who's delegated on site that is managing those systems that you're in constant communication with, right? You always want to make sure that you're connected to, you're Neuralinked, to put Elon Musk's little system out there. You're Neuralinked to what's happening to your building in some way, shape, or form, always in constant communication. And some of the things you want to be able to look at is things like HVAC, lighting, security, energy management type systems that are tracking usage of energy. And you want to be able to look at space utilization, of course, how often certain spaces are being used and whether or not they're being used in the way that's supposed to be used, right?
Yeah.
So some KPIs that kind of go with that are as well are PMs. Are you tracking your preventative maintenance? Is the preventative maintenance that you are tracking, is it having the outcome that you want it to? If you're doing PMs, but the same piece of equipment keeps breaking, what's the problem? Is it parts? Is it people, right? Did you
Yeah.
know that I think it's 84% when it comes to reliability maintenance? 84% of defects upon a piece of equipment or an asset is caused by careless work habits. So most people don't even realize that sometimes asset performance is drastically impacted by the persons who are actually doing the maintenance on the piece of equipment. And
Yeah.
having those building management systems, those CMMS systems to track PMs and looking at seeing how the performance is critical in that area. And of course, if you're using water, how often are you using water? Carbon emissions, you're looking at those. You're looking at sensors for pieces of equipment, how often are things failing? And you're just looking at how reactive is your property? Are you proactively engaging in maintenance? Are you reliability thinking? Are you applying reliability thinking to that building, right? You're not just thinking about how do you fix things, you're thinking about how to improve things. You're looking at how to design out of the defects, how to take those out of the system altogether. And by doing all that and doing that as systems thinking, you're using your BMS, your CMMS in a way that is going to help you track whatever key performance indicators that you're supposed to be tracking as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this theme comes up again and again of this reactive versus proactive, not just being in the habit of fixing things, but being in the habit of improving things along the way. So I think that's excellent. So what are some of the strategies to get the most out of a space in a hybrid environment? How does everything that you just said kind of shift when companies are trying to get people back into the office? What's going to help, a facilities manager, get the right information to help with all of that?
Yeah, space visualization is definitely one of those things that you want to be able to take advantage of technology for that. Using any kind of sensor systems of how often people are using rooms. You can use that through lighting as well. If you have automatic lights that come on and off whenever somebody walks in the room, that can kind of tell you a little bit about how you're using space.
Oh, totally. And there's so much we could talk about there, right? With, what drives people back in, like how can you make it purposeful when they're in the office? How can you make it so that people don't just walk in and sit on Zoom calls all day?
Yes.
Right? So there's so much thinking on that as well.
Yeah. I was going to say too,
Yeah.
with space utilization, just like in any hybrid environment, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, a skill to have is to also understand what are your priorities, because some things can be done at home.
Yep.
Some things actually should be done at home.
Yeah.
We all felt that way. But here's the issue. A lot of that's subjective. What
Yeah.
I feel comfortable doing at home, some might feel comfortable doing in the office,
True.
right? So
True.
going back to what we talked about in the beginning, understanding team dynamics, knowing your team, relationship building, that kind of thing. And then of course, aligning that with the business outcomes. What is actually required from the business? What does the client want? What is the organization trying to achieve? All that stuff. And then as a manager, you're saying, okay, so how do we outline now my priorities of what actually could be done in the office that's most effective for the business outcomes, but also balancing that with the morale of my team. How are they most effective? Energy management, right? More than just time management, energy management. What gives them the most energy? Is it doing this type of work in the office, giving them energy? And they feel like they're more productive doing this type of work in the office versus when they're at home? Or do I just kind of force the issue depending on what the client wants, right? Like, it's just all that stuff you have to kind of balance.
Yeah, I think the focus on where people get their energy is huge. I think, marketing teams, for instance, they get a lot of energy from each other in person, brainstorming, whiteboarding, putting everything up on, and there's a real purpose for having marketers come into the office and getting that energy from each other. But then there's some days where, we just have to dig into the data and pull analyses and reporting that, of course, you can do that from home, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
def
I think energy management is overlooked skill. I
yeah,
think
I
most
love
people think
that.
time management is where they need to focus their efforts. But if you focus on energy management, not for yourself, but also for your team, you're going to get a lot more done.
Yeah, I love that, George. So, can you think of a good example, maybe a recent client, where you've helped them, stay connected and engaged, whether they're remote or in the office? And can you think of, what was the key there?
I had four sites in Austin, and I was hybrid. I had to go to the sites sometimes to go see them. So that's one thing, is understanding when it's time to actually go to see them in person. Sometimes we want to text, and we understand in the text things are going south. So what do? We pick up the phone, because we understand there's a certain complexity that maybe text just isn't the right medium to have this conversation. So when we pick up the phone, we want to hear tone. We want to hear, the oscillations in your voice. We want to hear all this other stuff to let persons know that you care and you're engaged in the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And then other times, phone is just not enough. You got to go to the site in person. But whatever it is you're doing, whichever medium you're choosing, not only should you do it frequently, whether it's on satisfaction surveys, whether it's frequent virtual meetings, maybe there is something you want to brag about that not only is your client doing, but we're also doing, and you're always kind of putting that out there so they understand what's happening and you're engaging them. But when it comes to the relationship building part, like I was mentioning earlier, which I think is the most essential skill, sometimes going in person and having that face-to-face, having that lunch, having those office talks, those water cooler conversations, typically are fairly beneficial, because not only are you getting to know them as a person, but you're going to figure out really fast what are their priorities, what are their likes, their dislikes, what are things that they do and don't do. And then you're going to incorporate that into your team, because you're going to get to know them better. Whereas in a hybrid environment, you might be able to do that, but sometimes you're limited on time. You're limited on maybe the scope of what you can talk about because of the time. And then, of course, exposure. So by understanding when is it time for you to have that on the phone conversation, maybe a virtual chat, a text, and actually going on site is key. Being able to discern, and I was able to do that, and I developed a pretty good relationship, even though it was a tough client. I was able to develop a good relationship with them, which helped to mitigate a lot of maybe the stress and the things that they're going through and the performance that they needed the performance goals that they wanted to achieve, right? So it helped a lot of that.
Yeah, I think your experience too is very similar for managers, right? I think leaders also need to be able to decipher, is this a chat? Is this a phone call? Is this a Zoom? Or do I actually need to see this person in person? And it's just so funny because I feel like COVID came around and we forgot about these basic communication skills, right? I mean, if you go before COVID, when we were going in 5 days a week, we knew when it was time to meet in person, have a phone call, have a chat. For some reason, it just created so much panic and chaos that your call to get back to these basics is so important. And I'm so glad you mentioned tone because not many people realize the importance of tone. You can't hear tone in a text or a chat, right? You can make up whatever somebody is feeling in your own mind, right? Based on the words on the chat. So I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm always on my pedestal talking about tone. So
Yes.
I'm just so happy you mentioned that.
I think just to go a little bit more on what you were talking about when it comes to leadership and discerning, if just to emphasize again, whenever you're talking to somebody and you're in person, there's just so much there that we lose. And I think in a hybrid environment, sometimes we use that, unfortunately, as a means to hide or put off, right? Not necessarily hide, but put off
True,
something that needs to happen, right? A
true.
conversation that needs to happen. And being in remote provides us that shield, that certain level of protection.
It's correct.
And we need to overcome that feeling and being able to say, whenever I get that feeling in a hybrid environment, even more so, I need to make the proactive effort to communicate, to develop that relationship, because it could be very easy to just stay behind my screen and just do the job in a way that's very, I don't even know this is a word, anonymous. So where people don't even know I'm doing it. So I think it's a little harder in a hybrid environment, but you have to make the proactive effort to converse with people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, intentional communication, it takes extra effort. And
Hmm.
so hybrid makes us all you have to put in the extra effort to make hybrid work.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're saying. All right, we are coming up on time. So last two questions here. What's the most important lesson you learned from leading a facilities team through the transition to hybrid work? What would be your biggest lesson to share with our listeners?
Aligning expectations. That's first.
Yeah.
And that encompasses a lot of different things, right? Whether it's your property, your people, your assets, you're trying to figure out what are the expectations, aligning them, managing them, of course, and how to achieve those expectations, because oftentimes things get lost in translation. There's a miscommunication. Somebody thought you were going to do this, but really you did this. And then understanding what are those business goals with those expectations, of course, is part of that, right? So aligning expectations on all accounts, whether it's your employees, your client, your manager, your leadership, your organization, ensuring that there's some alignment in expectations and managing those expectations clearly is key.
Hmm.
And then the other most important lesson that I've learned is you have to focus on people development. You have to make sure that you are people focused.
Yeah.
And that includes workforce planning, succession planning, learning and development, leadership development. What skills do they need, whether it's technical, operational, strategic, all of those things. You want to look at human capital management. How do you get your people to the point where they can empower, or they're empowered and they're delegated to do the job, and you can entrust them to do the job? And if you don't have someone that you can help train that can manage those things on site, start doing that. Start focusing on somebody you can, professionally develop, career develop, that kind of stuff. So that way they feel empowered to do the job when you're not around, because sometimes you're not going to always be on site. So I think aligning expectations and then, of course, people development, I think is huge. Those are the two biggest things that I've learned.
That's awesome. And if you align your expectations, you're actually helping your people too, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
at the end of the day, I think what we're all saying here is focus on the people and you will see the business results.
Yes,
Um,
I agree
awesome.
100%.
Awesome, George. Well, it has been such a huge pleasure meeting you and talking to you today. I think everything you've shared is going to be very helpful to our listeners. Where can people find you if they have extra questions after they listen?
They can find me on LinkedIn if they'd like. I'll give you my LinkedIn URL in the description. Maybe that if you can post it in the description when you guys post this.
Yeah, no worries.
And I think that'd be the best way to contact me if they had any questions.
Awesome. Great, George. All right. Thank you again. And yeah, I'll catch you later.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. It was a pleasure.